The terror attack in Paris on the Charlie Hebdo satirical magazine has reignited a debate in Australia about free speech. It's over whether the federal government should repeal or amend Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. It bans hate speech. You might recall last year's controversy when the Attorney-General George Brandis said that people do have a right to be bigots and say things that others might find offensive or insulting. The government had promised to alter Section 18C, but it then changed its mind and the debate over free speech stalled. Now the Islamist terrorist attack in Paris has revived it, as Louise Milligan reports.
A sea of sombre humanity flooded the streets of France as a nation came to mourn. Not just the deaths of 17 people, journalists, police officers and others, caught up in 3 days of terror in Paris, but also the attack on a principle the French hold dear, liberté, in particular free speech.
It will show the strength and dignity of the French people, who will shout their love of freedom and tolerance.
These were the images that so enraged the Islamicists who stormed the magazine's office last week. Many of them lampoon the Prophet Muhammad. His depiction is forbidden under Islamic tradition.
For Muslims, the character of the Prophet and our religious symbols are extremely important. There's cartoons which depict, him in the middle of a sex act. How could that not be offensive to somebody who holds the character of that individual central to the whole belief system? Categorically, no Muslim in Australia would support what occurred last week. But on the same basis, we have a right to be offended by what people do.
Offence and causing offence shouldn't be justification to be taken to court and to shut down freedom of speech in this country.
Some Australian politicians are now using the deaths of the Charlie Hebdo journalists to argue that freedom is under attack in Australia too, through Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, which outlaws hate speech.
What's been demonstrated by the horrific acts that have occurred in France has been the outpouring of people from right around the world that believe that freedom of expression is important, that we should be in a position to express views that others don't like, and they should be counted in the court of public opinion. There's never an excuse for violence. There's never an excuse to say we're going to be cowed into silence or bullied or beaten or bludgeoned into silence. And so that's why I support freedom of speech in this country.
Last year, Attorney-General George Brandis created a storm of controversy when he announced plans to repeal Section 18C.
Well, Mr. President, people do have a right to be bigots, In a free country, people do have rights to say things that other people find offensive or insulting or bigoted.
It became very toxic, and I think the government did a terrible job of trying to sell it by focusing on the right to be a bigot. That might be legally correct, but it's not the sort of argument that is going to bring racial minorities on board.
It didn't. The Prime Minister scrapped the repeal to the law in an attempt to get the Muslim community on side in the fight against terrorism.
When it comes to counter-terrorism, everyone needs to be part of Team Australia.
But the attack in France has propelled 18C back into the national debate.
What we know is that many cartoons that Charlie Hebdo produced would not have been republishable in Australia, and we need to identify very clearly about whether we actually believe in free speech. And one of the best ways to do that is to amend the laws that make it unlawful to offend or insult someone.
Section 18C makes it illegal to offend, insult, intimidate or humiliate a person based on their race, colour or ethnicity. Notably, it does not include religion, and so the Charlie Hebdo cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad would not be banned in Australia. But the race-based cartoons in Charlie Hebdo would be banned here. The professional pot stirrers who lost their lives in the name of satire did not confine their jibes to religion. Racial stereotypes like this Jewish caricature were also fair game. And there was the French black politician depicted as a monkey, their comment on racism in France.
Political communication can include insults, okay?
Human rights law professor Sarah Joseph says she was at first glance offended by the Charlie Hebdo monkey cartoon.
I have since read that that cartoon was in fact a satire on racism, using the most crude racism to attack racism rather than that government minister. That may or may not be true, but what it does remind me is that a picture with context is completely different to a picture without context.
Islamic Council of Victoria President Gaith Graham gets the joke, but he's tired of xenophobia. He sees vilification all the time, particularly after incidents like Paris or the Martin Place siege. Bile-filled emails clog his inbox.
I will not sit by and let you enslave my country, murder and rape my people. That's representative, unfortunately, of a particular view out in the community.
While 18C does not technically protect Australia's Muslim community, Graham believes it's crucial the principles enshrined in the Act are protected.
It hurts when somebody makes comments or statements which have no intention other than to actually humiliate, ridicule, or hold your core beliefs up for humiliation and ridicule. I think people forget that minorities fundamentally start off behind the 8 ball. We don't have the same opportunity to have our voice heard as people who've got that space publicly. The protections of that legislation are really important for all communities, whether it's religious or cultural.
Today, the surviving journalists at Charlie Hebdo put together tomorrow's edition of the magazine. This is to be the cover, defiantly displaying the image of the Prophet Muhammad siding with the magazine, declaring the now ubiquitous mantra of free speech, Je suis Charlie.
I actually don't think a publication like Charlie Hebdo in Australia would necessarily be that successful or survive commercially. But what I do know is that I would rather see a publication fall over because people don't want to buy it rather than because it's censored by law.
I understand what he's saying. People have a right to have a view and have that view heard. But at the same time, I have a right to be able to say what you're saying hurts me. And it's not for you to dictate how I respond to that bigotry. Because it's bigotry.
Charlie, 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 Charlie. Louise Milligan reporting.